This is the record of our second expedition to the site of Britain. It was a grim undertaking, but we had to go, otherwise all the members of the first expedition would have died for nothing. And we knew from the two who got back to humankind before they collapsed that they had had extraordinary luck in their search. Also that they had brought all their finds down to a shore for embarkation before they began to sicken and tried, too late, to escape. So we had to go. It was a long, difficult journey, but at last we were approaching this most desolate island, one of the loneliest spots on earth. And it is fated to remain so, for it bears this curse, this infection that killed our countrymen. We ourselves were determined not to set foot on the shore, not to touch anything, only to look, and look again for as long as we could. We had come to the right place. Here were the objects which had belonged to the poor wretches of the First World. Though torn from their setting, these things could show us, we thought, how this lost people lived. They could perhaps recall for us something about the world before the catastrophe. The first observation we made was that these people of the First World had no manner of their own. The things which they made are first in one style, then in another, and all in conflict. It is hard to explain such a medley. Some of us think that they must have imitated the styles of many different ages, some that they were obliged to buy them from various nations. One thing is sure, all the styles are degraded of their kind, and much of the workmanship slovenly. Several of these articles seem to have been stamped out without aid of human hand. Imitation was so rife that it must mean some sickness of the mind. These forgotten Britons plainly lived in a world of pretense. All these were found in one home, yet they show an extraordinary mixture of fancies. They suggest a yearning for a vigour that had left them.
Taser. Nothing like a nice cup of tea. Nothing like a nice cup of tea. Nothing like a nice cup of tea. I see they caught that Surrey puma at last. Really? Surrey puma captured, it says here. That ferocious mammal that has been terrorising the Surrey commuters with its unpredictable sallies. The third beast what has been terrorising that lovely part of the Surrey wolds. You know what it turned out to be? What? Sheep. Sheep? It was a sheep. Really? A sheep what got hold of some drugs, become crazed, gone berserk and gone round biting people. It just shows you how incredibly gullible and naive people can be. They see something flitting through the laurels, they immediately assume it's a puma. Whereas in fact there's a perfectly rational, logical explanation, namely that a sheep was broken into a chemist, got hold of some benzodiazepine, and he's rushing round the countryside in a state of excitement. There's always a logical explanation for everything. There's always a logical explanation for everything.
From the beginning we saw that they must have had too much ownership. No one of us could possibly own so many things, nor would he wish for such a burden. One wonders how the family that dwelt in a room like this could ever have had any rest. These angular structures are of rough metal. They do not appear to have any use, yet nuts and bolts and other old machine parts are embedded in them. We cannot imagine what they were for. In this wilderness of the ugly, the false, and the mechanical, we saw some objects of quite another kind. They stand out from the rest for their excellence. They're delightful in shape and colour, and their materials are most remarkable. Our own designers may be glad to learn from them. So alien do they seem, we believe they must be the work of invaders or refugees who brought some better tradition with them to the island. If so, then the natives failed to adopt it. Here is another puzzling find. These are false fish. We can understand why human beings should wish to have live creatures in their houses, but not why they should give room to counterfeits. It seems that pretense had so infected their minds that they could not shake off a passion for the sham. All these objects, including the fruit and the flowers and the plants, are made of the same substance as the fish. There is something repulsive in the colors and texture of this unknown stuff. Yet the imitation was painstaking. Some of us believe that there must be another explanation beyond a love of the sham for its own sake. We think that natural life was already dying out in the island, and that these last unhappy beings liked to make copies of what they had lost. What else could account for this artificial barley? Some of the discoveries laid bare by the first expedition will perhaps never be satisfactorily explained. It is thought that this large object was let into the wall as a hearth, but there is no trace of a fire ever having kindled in it. This grotesque effigy in metal. The angular garb is unparalleled. It may well be that this was a ritual figure. The implements hidden in the hollow back are for tending a fire, but like the hearth itself, they have never been used. Massive, unused hearth, many dog images, and a ritual figure. This whole group must, we think, be the shrine of a cult of the dog. Among a people apparently so degraded, religion could readily decline into barbarous cults and superstitions. This idol, with characters inscribed on the pedestal, is possibly an altar set up for the dog cult. It has always been remembered that the men of the First World came to worship machines. The discoveries of our expeditions prove this to be true. There were machines everywhere, and some looked as though they had served religious purposes. Even their dwellings were crowded with machines, and a great deal of their time must have been spent in operating them. Many seem to have been used for simple domestic acts, as though men and women could no longer do these things for themselves. The machines took many strange forms, and among them were several which seemed to us graceful and well made. All these contrivances had to be planned and made and transported and fed. And it must have tired the imagination of the men of the First World to think of occupations for so many machines. obsessed with the telling of hours, minutes, and seconds, perhaps because they knew their days were numbered. We can feel sadness for these people who so enslaved themselves that they had no time left for pleasures. Here, we are sure, is the chief among all their gods. Unlike the other religious objects we've found, this great image is full of strength and power. They lavish what was left of their workmanship upon it. It glows and it gleams. Yet in our eyes it has a greedy, devouring look. We can guess that these men had made for themselves a god whom they both loved and hated. What sacrifices, we wonder, were offered before this pitiless divinity? Here is a smaller image, shrouded for some solemn occasion. When the first expedition set out, every one of us believed that the catastrophe came from without. Some said that a comet had grazed the Earth, some that there had been a sudden flare from the sun. Now we think otherwise. The things our brave countrymen found, and that we have seen and recorded, are only a few. No more than the objects of one or two dwellings miraculously preserved from the First World. But they are enough to tell us that these islanders, and probably all peoples living at that time, suffered from some inner corruption. In this our moralists find the cause of the catastrophe. They were choked and weighted with possessions. They became serfs, downtrodden by machines and the god of the machines. Poor creatures, they tried to get back the nature they had destroyed through animal cults and the counterfeiting of plants and flowers and of wheat itself. But this only added to their sickness, the sickness of pretense. They made false iron and flesh and wood and fire. Where things were pretense, perhaps thoughts were also. We can feel pity, only pity for these last men and women. They were hollow. They were lost. And so, until we went back, they were forgotten.